Welcome to this week's episode of Talking Therapy. Talking Therapy is the companion podcast to my YouTube series In Therapy. In Therapy, we follow brave participants as they go on real-life therapeutic journeys with me. And my intention in this podcast is to go deeper into some of the themes that come up as part of In Therapy, to answer your questions as they come up from watching the episode. So if you would like to ask a question as part of Talking Therapy, please do go to the episodes on YouTube. You can post in the comments below. But also to build the sense of community, that my hope with these series is it's not just those people I'm working with one-on-one which are going on a journey, but you're also coming along on the journey with us. This is the first episode of 2021, and at this point in time, it's Monday the 4th of September at 8 o'clock tonight. We're having another announcement here in the UK. It sounds like we're going to go into our third lockdown, and I know that a lot of people around the world that follow the series are either currently already in or perhaps facing more restrictions as coronavirus continues to spread in the way that it is. So I wanted to speak a little bit to some of how I think people might be feeling about that. I should say this also may be we're doing a couple of episodes this afternoon, but this might be one of the last episodes filmed in the studio for a while, depending upon the restrictions that come in. And I think a lot of people are feeling even more overwhelmed, ironically, at this point than they were perhaps 10 months ago when the first lockdowns came in March. One would think in some ways that we're perhaps a bit more practiced and a bit more prepared, but I think there's a level of emotional tiredness and perhaps even physical tiredness that's setting in for people. I think also, particularly here in the UK, we're in the depths of winter. It's very cold and it gets dark very early. Whereas in the first lockdown, it was the springtime and we sort of had the sense of summer coming, which I think for a lot of people made it easier. However you're feeling at this point, what I would always say is it's okay to feel the way that you feel. It might be you feel relieved. I have to say, a part of me is hoping that the lockdown is more severe and we can sort of nest in as a family again and have that quality family time together. It might be that you're feeling a sense of concern about isolation. I know that particularly in the first lockdown, a lot of people suffering from chronic illnesses really struggled with that sense of having less contact. I know others, and I'm going to speak to this in a question a little bit later. I know for some people as well, suffering from chronic illness, there's a growing sense of frustration at hearing people that don't have chronic illnesses complaining about having some restrictions to their life, when there are people with chronic illness that have lived with those restrictions and much more severe for sometimes many years. Beyond just accepting and allowing your feelings to be there, what I also really wanted to speak to and to encourage is very often what happens when we're in situations that we don't want to be in or times that feel challenging or difficult is our mind goes into the future in an attempt to try and imagine what might happen, try to make sense of it, try to sort of think, well, if that happens, I'll do that. It's what I call we try to think our way to a feeling of safety, or we try and think our way to a feeling of okayness. The thing is that feeling safe, feeling okay is not a thought. It's not something that is a product of our mind being active. It's actually the opposite. It's a product of our mind calming and coming more deeply and more fully into our body. What we resist will persist. The more we fight our thoughts, the more we go into a place of feeling frustrated and then feeling frustrated at feeling frustrated, judging ourselves for how we're feeling or how we're not feeling. It just feeds all of that stress, that anxiety, that worry, that loneliness. One of the most helpful things that I've learned in my own self-development, and it's one of the key starting points for pretty much everyone that I work with as well, either implicitly as part of people going through the reset program alongside sessions with me, or explicitly of actually teaching it, is learning how to shift our state. Learning how to come more deeply, more fully into our body. being more present, being more connected, being more here in this moment. Because ultimately what life is it's a series of moments. But often we're sucked into the past, or we're worrying about the future, or we're judging what's happening now. We're almost everywhere and anywhere except being here, being connected, being present, and being in the moment. And so much of the suffering that we experience in life is not what happens. It's our rejection of, our reactions to, our resistance of what happens. It's the stories that we tell ourselves about what things ultimately mean. So when we come back to thinking about the current restrictions that we have with coronavirus, it's very easy to go into our story of frustration, of loneliness, of anxiety. But that isn't the only choice that's available to us. In fact, what I would also say is when we're under situations of stress or we're outside of our comfort zone, we tend to have a few default ways of how we tend to respond in those situations. Maybe under stress, you're someone that goes into anxiety. Maybe under stress, you're someone that tries to control what's happening. Maybe under stress, you're somebody that kind of hides away and sort of tries to disconnect from the world. The chances are that whatever you tend to do as your pattern is what you're doing now. It's a powerful opportunity to see, to witness, to observe. If you can see it, you don't have to be it. If you can see yourself going into those reactions, you can see yourself going into those patterns, it gives you a choice. It gives you a choice to learn, to train your system to respond differently. This is where practices like meditation and mindfulness become so helpful. Learning how to be present even when, and perhaps particularly when, things feel challenging or things feel difficult is like a superpower. Does it mean that it dramatically always changes the circumstances? No. Is it always easy to do? No. But does it often shift how we feel about what's happening? Yes. So my challenge to you, my invitation to you, is if you're facing some potentially challenging months ahead, use those as a training school. Use those as a place to practice working on the issues that come up anyway in your life. These are not unique to this moment. They're just more intense in this moment, perhaps, but there's also more of an opportunity to work on them in this moment. And if in a few months' time, you've been successful in training and conditioning your mind to be a little calmer, if you've practiced being more in your body, when you feel tempted into anxiety, controlling, worrying, whatever it may be, you're able to slow down. You're able to connect. You're able to listen to your breath. You're able to sense and feel your arms and legs. You've got something then enormously valuable out of this experience, because these coming months are going to mean something. The question is, what are you going to make them mean? Are you going to make them mean that you're a victim, that life is miserable, that 2021 is going to be a write-off? Or do you make these months mean that you have an opportunity to grow? That perhaps for months or years you've been thinking about you need to develop a daily meditation practice, or you need to learn to reset your nervous system, or you need to learn to break certain habits of thinking. Maybe this is an opportunity. There's going to be less distractions. There's going to be less events, less things going on. And I think it's a really beautiful opportunity to commit to ourselves. I know that people are in different seasons, different parts of the world, but particularly if you're here in the UK where it's cold, the days are short, it's dark in the evenings, you've got time, you've got space. As I talked to Katie about in her first episode, when you make a commitment to yourself, your life changes. The single most important relationship in our life is the relationship we have with ourselves. If you are looking for some tools, if you're looking for a structured path to help you in making changes like this, I'm going to be relaunching the Reset program in a few weeks' time. So keep an eye on my YouTube channel. I'll talk about it in my podcast, here on my podcast. Also, if you're not already, go to my website, alexhoward.com, get on my newsletter. That's the best place to get the latest announcements. The Reset program is a life-changing 12-week program where we go deep into learning how to reset and calm your nervous system. We're working with your mind in that, we're working with your emotions, and we're also working with your body. If you want a little taste, something to play with in the meantime, I put out a simple guided meditation on YouTube a few weeks ago. That could be a really helpful piece to start with. So I wanted now to answer some of the questions that have been posted below the In Therapy episodes on YouTube. Remember, if you'd like me to answer your questions in one of these episodes, that's the best place to put the questions. You can also email hello@alexhoward.com. And Angelique, I'm not going to read out the whole question, but the essence of her question is that with people going through the shutdowns, lockdowns, and having their sort of freedoms inhibited as a result of coronavirus, there's a sense of people complaining about that and understandably feeling fed up and frustrated. But for those of you which have been suffering from perhaps a chronic illness for a number of years, can also be quite infuriating and quite frustrating to see people complain about not being able to go out and do things when perhaps you've not been able to go out and do things for years and no one's really paid much attention. But also, it's not just you can't do things because of restrictions. You also have all the physical symptoms, which mean that you can't do things, and the kind of day-to-day suffering that goes along with that as well. So I wanted to share, Angelique, a few thoughts around this. I think the first one is just to say, I think it's really hard. I think sometimes there's just a truth in life that certain situations are just really difficult. They're painful, we suffer, and there aren't always often aren't easy answers to that suffering. So often what happens is we're looking to other people to validate, to witness, and to see how we feel, because ultimately we want the holding and the support that comes from that. And it almost hurts more when people don't see that. But I'm going to tell you something that you already know. You can't make someone see things that they can't see. You can do your best, and there's another question we're going to come to in a minute that sort of speaks to this. You can do your best to articulate and communicate to people, but people understand and make sense of things through the lens of their own experience. So if someone's having a relatively quote unquote easy life and then goes through, coronavirus lockdown, and it's challenging and difficult, but their misery and pain is not a fraction of yours, it doesn't negate their experience. And as much as you deserve and you long for and you want them to understand, they can only understand through the lens of their experience. This is why often people that have suffered a lot in their life are more empathic and they're more compassionate. Because even though they might not have experienced the same suffering as everyone else, they understand what it means to suffer, and they understand that in a deeper way. So my recommendation is to validate for yourself how you feel, but also let go of, as much as you can, of the wish and the desire for others to see things differently to how they do. Ultimately, you need to be there for you. The more you validate, the more you allow, the more you acknowledge your feelings, that in of itself will have its own healing power and its own healing impact. But I think what you'll find is through doing that, somehow some things will soften in you. And from that place, often it's then easier to communicate to others what we need, how we feel, because we're not doing it from that reactive place that tends to push people away rather than draw them in. The other thing that I would say is finding and investing in that community of people that do understand. And that might be through social networking sites. The Optimum Health Clinic has a Facebook group, which I know people can find very supportive. As part of the Reset program, we put people in groups Facebook groups going through the program together. I know those groups are incredibly supportive. Get the support that you need. Understand that people can only experience things through their lens of their own experience. And just because someone is not suffering in the way that you are, it doesn't mean they're not suffering in their own way as well. So the next question is from Fiona Louise, and it's a similar sentiment to Angelique's question. Again, I won't read the whole question because it's quite long, but the essence of which is that she made an effort to reach out and explain her situation with the chronic illness to family members. And they responded in a very pragmatic, practical way, but no sense of compassion or empathy or sensitivity towards her experience. And she found it understandably hurtful. She says that this hurt me greatly, as you can imagine. My question is, should I have it out with them? Or because it was with her parents, because they are elderly now, should I simply accept them as they are now and move on from it? They are not without their own personal worries and are warriors by nature. I guess I'm asking whether expressing to them how I feel is appropriate, or if I could work through these feelings without involving them. I think it's a really good set of questions, Fiona, and I think there aren't easy answers here. Sometimes it is good to have it out with people. Other times it just pushes them away further. And it's hard for me to speak to that without understanding and knowing more of the details of the situation. But a little bit like what I was saying in answer to Angelique's question, I think part of it is it's really important that you validate for you how you feel. The more that you are there for yourself, the more you allow your experience to be legitimate, the less reactive towards and the less needy of you'll feel for other people. But equally, when our own parents are unable to understand how we're suffering, that's hard. Like, that sort of objective experience that hurts and is challenging and is frustrating. And again, it goes back to the point I was making to Angelique. Having the community of people that do understand is important. And I think particularly when we're dealing with our parents, it's all the more painful because often that's our history, right? That's where we often learned to not listen to our own feelings because our parents didn't know how. And often it's because of their own circumstances and their own backgrounds. But because they weren't there for us emotionally at the time, we learned to not be there for ourselves emotionally. So when that pattern plays out with them now, it's all the more painful and all the more frustrating because it triggers the history. So I would also take some time to understand, to make sense of, to work through your emotional history with being seen, with your emotions being allowed, with your emotions being welcomed by other people. And I think processing the past will probably help you be less reactive in the now. It's like you haven't just got, I think, the wound right now of not being seen. You've got all the old wounds of not being seen, and it's almost like rubbing salt in those wounds each time you have an experience like this at this point. So I hope that's helpful in terms of putting a bit more context around it. I just want to say I think both these situations, they are challenging, and doing the best one can to navigate is learning new skills, new strategies, but also being gentle and patient with yourself in the process. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Talking Therapy. There's going to be another new meditation coming out this Sunday, so watch out for that on my YouTube channel. It will be a helpful way of just having some more support through these challenging times that we are going through. Next week on In Therapy, we're going to be catching up with David again. It's quite an experiential episode. I start to actively work with David to teach him how to defend against his inner critic. I look forward to talking with you then. Be kind to yourself. Go gently.